First video takes the edge off. You ever try talking to a camera? Feel pretty silly. What's up everyone, my name's Joe. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be tackling one of the most revered and indulgent pieces of meat in the barbecue world, and that's a tomahawk steak. Choosing the tomahawk steak over other ribeyes, like the cowboy ribeye, the bone-in ribeye, or boneless ribeye, is really about the wow factor because it's really no different. It has a big ass bone in it. Sometimes they can extend out several inches, and it really, when cooked correctly, can be a great centerpiece at a barbecue. This steak is very intimidating, especially to beginners, but actually it's not that hard to cook. So if you're ready to turn this into a smoked masterpiece, then stick around. If you've never had a smoked steak, you're gonna be blown away by the flavors that this thing has. It's over 2 inches thick, which makes it perfect for smoking. That large meat's gonna take in a lot of those smoke flavors and really give it a deep, rich, smoky flavor. So let's talk about seasoning. All right, so salt and pepper is the go-to for most people, but we're gonna spice it up a little bit. I got 1 tablespoon of black pepper, cumin, and smoked paprika and garlic powder, and then 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, ancho chili powder, and salt. Now you can use a lot of salt. You can't really over salt this steak because it's so thick, so just use it to your tasting. You really want to make sure it's evenly distributed. If you're smoking it at a lower temperature, that brown sugar is not going to burn. So, all right, so you do not rub the steak, you pat the steak, but if we let it sit for a few minutes, the moisture that the salt draws out is going to make that rub really stick to the meat, so you don't have to really worry about patting it too much. And then you're going to have a lot on the board. Use the steak and pick it up. All right, so we're going to use twine to tie this thing up. So 2 reasons. 1, it's a big ass steak, and you don't want to have paid for a tomahawk and end up with a boneless ribeye. So we're going to tie it up to keep it from falling apart, because when it gets to room temperature, the fat gets soft and then it falls apart. Secondly, it's going to create a uniform shape, which really allows it to cook evenly. You're going to wrap this around, make sure it catches that little piece of meat there. Because when I pull this tight, it should pull that steak together. Plus, you break out kitchen twine and people's like, that dude knows what the hell he's doing. All right, so I got my smoker running about 275 to 300. That's kind of the sweet spot. You can really smoke a bigger piece of meat like this from 225 to 300. 225 is going to give you more smoke flavor, while the 300 gives you less smoke flavor, but it's a lot faster cook, obviously. Now, tip number 1, I recommend getting an internal thermometer for the meat. I like the Meter Plus. It connects to my phone, and I know it's kind of new, high tech, and people like to use the poke and hope method, but for larger pieces of meat, it's really important to have a thermometer, because you're never going to get a consistent cook with this meat if you're just poking it and hoping that it feels like your palm. Tip number 2 is going to be to make sure you have a thermometer for the actual smoker. The ambient temperature is important, because your display on your pellet smoker or whatever you're using, or the thermometer that sits on top of the Weber or even on top of some offsets, are probably not going to be accurate. So you want to have a thermometer that's sitting on the grates where you're going to be cooking the meat to tell you the exact temperature that it's going to be. More bourbon. My smoker is actually sitting at 290. I just threw another log on. I'm using oak and cherry, so a little bit of a blend. All right, so let's throw this thing on. So what I like to do is I like to bring this thing up to about 110 degrees, and that allows me to take it off and sear it without it going over medium rare. All right, good night. We're putting it to sleep. Hey, so people always ask why do I put wood on the smoker, and it's really just to preheat it. When I put it on the fire, I want it to smoke as little as possible. When you throw this on and it takes a long time to heat up because there's moisture in it, it's going to be throwing off white smoke. So that's really why I do this. All right, so as if this steak wasn't going to already be awesome, we're going to be making a Mexican spiced compound butter. So what you need is a half cup of butter. That's 1 stick of butter. So we're going to be adding 2 roasted garlic cloves. We're going to be adding 2 tablespoons of cotija cheese. We're going to be using a half a teaspoon of coriander, 1 tablespoon of lime. We're going to be using 1 chipotle pepper from the adobo sauce. I like to dry this out and then use it. A half a teaspoon of cumin. We also have a pinch of salt. Got half of a zested lime. And we're going to use 2 tablespoons of cilantro. All right, so you want to make sure that you get this mixed up really good. So next what we're going to do is we're going to create a log here. You could probably just leave it in the bowl if you wanted. Just roll it up, squeeze, and now you can put it in the refrigerator or just leave it out here if you're cooking outside. All right, so this thing's been smoking for a little over an hour, about an hour and a half at 250 to 275. That's about how long you can expect to take on a 3-pound tomahawk. So as you can see, it has that deep, dark mahogany or cherry color. What I like to do from here is I like to get my coals ready. I have a grate that I'm gonna put into here. What I like to do is let the wood burn down the coal, and the reason I like to do that is because it's gonna produce an even heat all across the grate. All right, so we got this thing seared perfectly. I'm gonna go ahead and cut off the twine. We don't need that. Yeah, this is about 120. It's gonna carry over pretty perfectly to about 125 to 130, which is what we like, unless you're my mother-in-law. Then you leave it on there for a few more hours. All right, so what we're gonna do next while we let this rest is we're gonna take this butter that we made earlier and we're gonna actually place it on top of it, let it melt. So one thing about this butter, because it does have the cotija cheese in it, it's going to be a little more crumbly than what you would expect a regular compound butter to be. But when it melts, it's going to create a great texture. Okay. All right. So this thing's been resting for about 10 to 15 minutes. The butter started to melt. But first, I kind of want to explain why do we let this thing rest. So one thing to know is that when heat actually is applied to the muscle fibers, they're going to contract, which pushes all of that juice into the center of the meat. So if I were to cut into it while it's really hot, those juices are going to run out. The meat will look really juicy, but all the juices will have ran out onto the cutting board. It also allows for something called carryover cooking. If I smoke it to 110 to 115 and then I were to go to sear it and it's 125, 130, when I leave it on this cutting board, it's going to continue to cook for about 5 more degrees. Now, when you reverse sear a meat, that doesn't happen as much, but it does still happen. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is remove it from the bone. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is remove the ribeye cap here. The muscle fibers run in a different direction than the inner piece of the meat here, and we want to cut the meat perpendicular to the fibers. So if the fibers are running this way, you want to cut this way. All right, so you can see here, you could almost just separate it with your finger. It really is very easy to locate. Looking at this thing, I can tell you it's not gonna suck. Very tender, perfect medium rare. All right, so I think it's time we try it. Definitely doesn't suck. The smoke flavor is right there, front and center. The lime adds a really nice acidity. It cuts through the robust flavors from the smoke and all the fat that's in a tomahawk. But I think it's time I go inside where it's warm and enjoy this. I have a lot more videos coming for you guys. If you enjoyed it, please make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. But yeah, until next time.